Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome. Today we're going to take a deep dive first look at Shiloh, the First Day, designed by Steve Carey and published by Revolution Games. This game covers the pivotal first day of the American Civil War battle in western Tennessee on April 6, 1862. As we take a look at all the glorious components of Shiloh, the First Day, which is now the volume 11 in Revolution Games' blind sword system covering critical battles of the Civil War. This is the biggest game to date in the blind sword systems. We've got 5 maps, 3 counter sets, and the long campaign. There are 7 scenarios in the game. The 7th scenario is important to note, is the only one that uses both maps. So there is a ton of gameplay, even if you never play that larger 7th scenario that covers the entire 12 hours of the April 6th confrontation. Now, to set some historical context, this was a Confederate attack to try to wipe out Grant's Army of Tennessee. The historical battle lasted 2 days, from April 6th to April 7th. The designer has focused on the first day with this game. So this game focuses exclusively on April 6th, with the point being made that the Union reinforcements at the end of the first day really made the second day more a matter of fact, and if the Confederates were going to win this battle, they needed to win it in the first day. So the 7 scenarios all focus on the first day. We have 5 maps, 3 counter sets, a lot to talk about. Let's jump in and get started. First, some context on how gameplay works. So each turn in the game is 30 minutes of historical time. In the 7 campaigns, we've got one of the campaigns that uses a very small map and only lasts 90 minutes. And then the 7th scenario, and we'll talk more in detail of the scenarios as we go forward, the 7th scenario lasts a full 12 hours of historical time, 24 turns using both maps in this kind of sprawling, chaotic, classic Civil War battle. Gameplay length, I'm going to estimate for that shorter initial scenario 1, that's almost like a tutorial scenario, is probably about an hour in length. And then the rules mention, or the scenario booklet mentions, that the scenario 7, the full 12-hour entire day of April 6th, takes a substantial amount of time. Given the number of counters and the number of turns, I would guess that's probably looking like a full day type of gaming experience. And again, we have a lot of scenarios that go in between that are going to be more like 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours in length. And we'll take a look at those in detail as we get in there. Unit scale is at the regiment scale. There are some battalions in the game. Each strength point on a counter represents about 50 men, and each artillery strength point represents 1 gun. Let's highlight some of the key mechanics to kind of give an overview of gameplay, with the caveat again that this is volume 11 in the blind sword system. So if you've played any of the first 10 games, you're going to be largely familiar with the core rules, and we'll need to add on just kind of some of the specific rules that capture the uniqueness of this battle. One of the unique elements of this battle, there are no cavalry units in the game. There weren't very many present, but there are some events that can happen that can represent some of the cavalry actions that influence the battle over the course of the day. Now, at the heart of the blind sword system too is its chit pull system, which means that actions are going to be back and forth as brigades get activated. So it's a very dynamic, fluid experience where you're not going to be sitting around waiting for your opponent to play, waiting while your opponent plays for a long time. You know, that chit pull means that you could go on the very next pull. A lot of things back and forth, and every game is going to play out more in a unique fashion. There are orders that you're going to be giving once you pull a chit out. We'll talk about the sequence of play later, but at the brigade level, once your brigade activates, you're going to be giving it either an attack, defend, a maneuver, or regroup order. Line of sight plays a role, and this is as we look at the maps later, we'll see this is a very wooded campaign. Tons of forest and trees played a role in this battle, so we'll take a look at that, but line of sight, especially for artillery, of course, is a factor. Close combat modeled as well. From a morale standpoint, we have things like cohesion, rally, shaken units, all reflecting the emotional nature of Civil War combat. Units can also go to a battle-worn state, and the backside of the counters have that depleted state on them. Now, in terms of unique mechanics in this game to represent the unique nature of this battle, there are some US gunboats that played a role in the battle, and they are modeled in the game. There's also a looting mechanic. The Confederate forces were slowed down in their initial surge during the surprise attack in the morning by when they started looting the Union camps, and that's modeled in the game. And there is an entire alertness method to kind of handle the surprise attack by the Confederates in the early start of the day. And so that's modeled in the game with a unique mechanic that's unique to this game in the system as well. Lastly, the length of the battle and the nature of the battle leads to a low ammo mechanic that's modeled here too. So let's take a look at our documentation. We have 3 things to look at: the blind sword's core rules, the exclusive rules for Shiloh, and then the scenario book that has all of the 7 scenarios in it. The Blind Swords rulebook here is 16 pages. It's black and white. Not a lot of graphics. It's fairly text heavy here, but the explanations are sharp and clean. And again, kind of going back to the idea that this is volume 11 of this series right now, so a lot of the weaker points perhaps in the rules have been cleaned up along the way, and this is an extremely mature rule set that has been tested over a number of games. So it's nice when you know that the rule set has had this type of maturity and this type of clarity brought into it, and the writing is really clear and easy to learn. The exclusive rules now cover the Shiloh game here, and these have all of the unique rules, some of which we talked about, things like looting, things about how the game handles the Confederate surprise in the early morning of April 6th when they caught the Union forces off guard, how some of the commanders work in here. Johnston was the Confederate commander who was killed, so there's some special kind of mechanics around how the game handles that. We can see US gunboats down here. This is in color with some nice graphics to enhance kind of the explanations, and again, a good bit of it overlaps with the core rules, so kind of reinforces or strengthens or tweaks a little bit some of the core rules in the game. There is an extra stage in this game that talks about wrecked units that adds a special point in the sequence of play that's unique to this battle as well. So very clean, very easy. The graphics enhance that. And now we can take a quick look here at our scenario book. This highlights the 7 scenarios that are in the book. There's 24 pages. Lots of information. And one thing I think I'd like to point out with this too is that, again, only the 7th scenario, the last scenario, uses both maps. So this, although you have the potential to play a big game, there are 6 very well developed scenarios ranging from this first scenario here that's small, just covers one little map, and the smaller scenarios often have their own maps, as we'll take a look at those as we go forward. Then we get another short scenario here, 16.2, we are in for it now, and then these go up into the medium. 16.3 is medium, and there are, as we look at these, 3 of these scenarios use a small unique map just to them. 3 of them use one map, and again, only that last one uses all of the 2 maps put together to cover the entire day. And we get down in here, there is a nice scenario here covering, the scenarios tend to cover different points and the key points in the battle. 16.5 here is the Hornet's Nest, where some of the bloodiest fighting of the day happen. And this scenario is dedicated just to a historical recreation of that element of the battle. Then we have a scenario 6 here is a hypothetical mini scenario about Grant's last stand. So that's gives a little bit of a deviation from history to kind of explore that. And then 16.7 is the big one, the one that uses both maps, goes 24 turns, so 12 full hours of gameplay. In terms of complexity, I would give this a 4 out of 10. I think your core rules are very clear. It's not extraordinarily hard. Things are nice and sharp and clean. Exclusive rules really don't add a ton of chrome to this particular version, so I don't think you'll have any trouble, especially if you're familiar with the series, in terms of letting the complexity of the game kind of get in the way of your enjoyment of the game. In terms of solitaire rating, I'll give this, as I did with the other game that we looked at, Grand Havoc in the series, I'll give this a 6.5. I think that there is no solo bot or any special rules made up particularly for solitaire play, but the chit pool system I think works really well with solitaire play. And there are a couple of scenarios, scenario 1, and then I think it's Grant's Last Stand that talks about it's particularly well suited to solitaire. But I think this is a game, if you're a solitaire player with the chit pool system, there's no real hidden movement or hidden mechanics in the game. This is going to play brilliantly as a solitaire experience. So again, 6.5 out of 10. Let's take a look at our counter sheets. There are 3 of them in the game, so 528 counters altogether. These are all 5/8 of an inch and printed very beautifully on both sides. This is the battle-worn state of the second side of the counters. And we can see the Confederate forces here on the front. Mostly we've got the units over here on the left side. We can see artillery and the infantry here. Again, no cavalry units designated in the game. They didn't play a major role, and they're handled by some of the events that show up in the game. Then on the right-hand side, we can see the leaders, and then the leaders also have an associated chit that is going to be in that chit pull bag. So when you pull that leader out, that's when that leader's brigade gets activated, and you can activate the regiments and the units that are in that brigade. Then down here also we have some of the unique Confederate events. This, I think, again, adds a lot of flavor to these. A lot of these, most of the scenarios have one key event that you can designate and put into the bag for the particular turn, and then there's usually some amount of random events that are going to get dropped in there as well, which again really creates kind of an unpredictable nature of it when you don't really know who's going to go, when these events can trigger, what some of those events are going to be, kind of recreating a lot of that chaos and ambiguity that surrounded Civil War combat. Down here we have those low ammo markers that we talked about. Let's slide over now and take a look at the Union forces. Similar to the Confederate force sheet, we've got the Union forces over here on the left, artillery and infantry, then the commander leader counters and the commander chits that you're going to be pulling out, as well as Union events that sit in here over as well. Here are the US gunboats, the Tyler and the Lexington, that played a role in the battle, and they show up in some of the scenarios too. Again, Union forces on second side here, we can see the depleted status for those. Then if we come in here, lots of markers. So the Union camps played a role in the game, and some of the victory points for the Confederates are gaining control, or in the Union forces are gaining control of those Union camps, especially early in the day on April 6th. The shaken markers here are the special wrecked mechanic that shows up in this game, and then fire and move markers over here. Lastly, if we flip over, we can see again, this is kind of completely disrupted, that in kind of greater status after shaken, and then more fire and moved and camp controlled markers over here. Really nice clean counter set. They look really well printed and good, nice registration on them, so great job on those. Moving on to player aids. This is the general time record track that we've got. This is double-sided, but the second side is just kind of artwork here, as this will always be face up during the game. Victory point track here. We'll talk about when we look at the map how victory is designated in the game. Broken units as they kind of move their way back to available, and then the general time record track here with the starts and ends of all the different scenarios that go on, as well as the Confederate Army surprise element if you're playing one of the scenarios that starts at 8 a.m. Two identical combat results table, one for each player. This is the cohesion test, how you survive on that, terrain effects map, and then over here the combat results table that tells to what degree you need to have a cohesion test and what kind of damage has been done, as well as all of the fire combat shifts, and then close combat shifts, and then weapons range and effectiveness. So all of the combat charts and mechanics that you need here are all on one nice sheet flipped over for the second side, where you get the cohesion tests. And again, always nice to see one for each player so that you don't have to pass the thing back and forth. We have two brigade activation displays that help with organizing which brigades and divisions have been activated throughout the day. We can see here, this is the Confederate one. Really nice look to have a clean look at the order of battle too. This again is single-sided because they're always going to be facing up. And here's the one for the Union, again showing the order of battle with leaders, and be able to use this to kind of keep track of the activation as the scenarios unfold. More player aids. This I'd call kind of the miscellaneous player aid chart. We've got some terrain effects charts down here. Stacking rules are explained, artillery stacking, general casualty, and then this is the fog of war table for scenario 16.6. We'll explain more of that in a moment here. Backside is face up, so you can keep this one face up, and there are two of them, one for each player. So a lot of the miscellaneous tables here. We get to scenario reminders. I really like this. I can oftentimes, I think, save a lot of rules diving. So basically these are the reminders and kind of particular rules that apply to a particular scenario, kind of the chrome elements that you'd want to kind of keep in mind as you're playing that scenario, the things that can often be easily forgotten. It's really nice to see these because I generally do forget or have to look up a lot of these little odd bits and ends that attach to each scenario, so it's really nice to have them in one place, have them all listed, so when you're playing the scenario you can kind of look at them and have them all right in front of you. And then lastly, we have the event descriptions and the fog of war execution here. So these are basically when these chits are pulled within a particular scenario, and they list when they're used and when they're not used in scenarios. This event triggers and you carry out the instructions here. So again, creating a lot of variety in gameplay, and the timing of these can matter as well. Here we can see one that is actually the cavalry one that we talked about, where there aren't units designated for cavalry, but cavalry is handled by this event over here. So look at the Confederate ones here, and then on a separate player aid we have all of the Union events and the clarifications and how to execute those. And then if we flip these over, we can see the fog of war tables, and there's a specific fog of war almost for each of the scenarios. So this one triples up for scenarios 16.2, 16.3, and 16.4 fog of war table. But there's a fog of war chit that can get pulled out. And when you pull that out, you make a die roll on this chart depending upon what scenario it is. And for example, if we're playing the 16.7, the grand scenario, it says here roll 2d6 and add them together. Then we get this here, for example, if you get a 7, possible leader casualty. roll the 2 dice and roll the number from 11 to 66, and it gives instructions here. Then consult the general leader table on the player aid for the results. So again, adding more variety, unpredictability, and depth to the game, as these fog of war events can be anywhere from a very minor impact on the battle to none at all, or to something rather significant. And it's great too that they have fog of war for each of the different scenarios. I mean, these cluster together, but for the large part, depending upon the scenario, those fog of war events can be different, of course, depending upon what time of day it was and all those kinds of other factors that are playing a role in here. So, I would almost look at this again as not so much one game, but you've got really 7 games baked into one larger module. So a lot of depth apparent and a lot of thought and research put into making each one of the scenarios work really well. And lastly, we come to our maps. We have 5 map sheets in the game. These are paper maps, full color, of course. We have what we're looking at is the larger one on the left here, and then on the right here underneath the top that are on the 3 are the 2 22-inch by 34-inch maps that are butted together to form the 44 by 34-inch map for scenario 7. But again, you only use the 2 maps together for scenario 7. You don't need that for the other 6 scenarios. Indeed, 3 of the scenarios have their own dedicated smaller maps. So rather than making you take out one of the larger maps or butt the 2 together to play a smaller scenario, we have 3 small maps here. This is 8.5 by 11. This one here is 11 by 11, and then 15 by 15. So a really nice touch to be able to play those smaller scenarios without having to work around the larger map sizes. Now, 3 of the scenarios as well, so that those are for the 3 smaller ones. The 2 together are for the 7th scenario. Then 3 scenarios use one of the 2 22 by 34-inch maps. So again, kind of beating the same drum here, but it's not just the one large scenario. There's a lot of gameplay in the other 6 scenarios too. I'll show some close-ups for the map here so you can get a sense for the artwork involved. I think these are really crisp and clean and clear and good-looking maps that are going to be very, very functional, especially looking at the differences in altitude. They're really easy to pick out, so I don't think you're going to have any challenges with that. Another thing to note here as we look at these, there is a ton of forest in these maps. I mean, just woods everywhere, kind of highlighting the particular nature of this battle. We can see over here too the Tennessee River that's playing a role in some of the scenarios too. Additionally, we talked about how the camp control can play a role in some of the scenarios, and we can see here the Union camps that are involved with the combat. Hexes, by the way, are 13/16 big, and then the counters again are 5/8, so shouldn't be any trouble kind of moving things around. I should mention as well, stacking is 12 strength points, or if it's 1 unit, then that's greater than 12 strength points, then you're limited to that 1 unit. So not a very high stacking game, which I think is going to make it, again, the system itself is designed to be fast to play and easy to play. Let's talk a little bit about victory conditions. They're generally dependent upon 2 things. Thing number 1 is controlling objectives on the battlefield, and thing number 2, it's dependent upon casualties. So you're really trying to balance both your losses, inflicting losses, and minimize your own losses, as well as executing the objectives for a particular scenario. So relatively straightforward in terms of how you'll be determining victory at the end of a particular scenario. And so there you have it, a first look at Shiloh, the First Day, designed by Steve Carey and published by Revolution Games, Volume 11 in the Blind Sword system that they've been working on for a number of years now. This looks like a fantastic addition to the series, just in terms of the number of scenarios, with the big 7th scenario that covers 24 turns and a full day's worth of Civil War combat, as well as the other 6 scenarios. And then when you look back in with like the fog of war elements and the event chits and stuff like that, and the chit pull system, I think these battles can play out very differently each time you play them. So a lot of good depth and replayability. This looks like just a brilliant addition to the series. I can't wait to jump in and play it. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. If you've enjoyed a first look overview of this one, I can also point you to a first look overview video we did of Volume 8 in the series, which is a Grand Havoc. I'll put a link to that one here if you'd like to check it out. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a great day.